Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a really interesting topic. We're going to be talking about why some of the biggest challenges to growing our B2B business are internal. And on is the specialist here. We're going to be talking with Will Milano. Now, Will, you're a former CMO. You've been a CMO or head of marketing across 4 different professional service organizations over the last couple of decades. Right. And now you're independently servicing and consulting with professional service organizations. So you've had your fingers and your hands in a lot of different pots. I think that's what kind of that breadth of your experience is what we want to tap into here today. But before we start talking about the challenges and how the significant part of the challenges of growing our business are internal, I'd love to just have you, explain a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with you, Steve. Thanks so much again for inviting me. I really like your show. So I've been in marketing for close to 30 years now. And for the first 7 or 8 years of that was in the high tech sector. And then I sort of stumbled into first of several roles, as you said, on the professional services side of the ledger. It was with a management consulting firm. This was in the early 2000s. And really, I think just found my calling there and really grew to love the idea of marketing professional services organizations. And it's where I've been ever since, like you said, for the last 22 years. So.
Well, great. So here, I want to start out with just kind of the biggest question that we want to talk through today. And that is, why do you think that some of our biggest challenges to growing our B2B business are internal?
Yeah. Well, I to be honest, it starts with the fact that very few people in an organization, unless they're actively part of the marketing team, have any sort of marketing experience. And so there's a lot of sort of internal education that has to be done on a continuous basis. What are we doing and why, and what does everybody's role play in it? At the senior leadership team level, I've read something like, I believe the number is like 8% of C-level leaders have any marketing experience. When you get to the board level, it's something like 3%. And so you combine that with the fact that, and I think a lot of your listeners will probably resonate with, like, marketing can tend to get a lot of backseat driving.
Yeah.
A lot. Nobody seems short on the opinions of what marketing should do, whether or not they have any active or relevant experience in it. But part of the responsibility, certainly, of a marketing organization and anybody leading that organization is to do internal education around, when you throw around terms like brand and demand strategy and lead generation, like, a lot of things can knee-jerk come to mind for people of what that means. And you've got to really be able to level set the reality of all those things and the interplay and interconnection between all those things and what you're trying to accomplish from a marketing strategy standpoint in direct support of the business. And I think that's the biggest thing, that if you're a marketing leader supporting an organization, regardless of the industry, you've got to make it clear why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, you can't necessarily always articulate that it's not a slot machine. It's not, pull this lever. It comes out the bottom immediately. But what are the ultimate goals? How are you going to measure those goals along the way? Because it's something that I've seen, I think, in the last 20 plus years that, when I first got into marketing, to be honest, a lot of marketing ROI and were we doing the right things was a lot of gut instinct. It was a lot harder to measure things than it is today. And I think marketing, as much or sometimes more so than any other function in the organization, has the tools at their disposal to report very clearly where they're moving the needle and the impact that they're having.
It makes so much sense, right? I talk to a lot of CMOs on this podcast that, they have an imposter syndrome complex and how they earn that seat at the table of the C-suite executives. And I think a lot of it is that you're right, the other C-suite executives don't really know what they should be doing, how they should be contributing. In fact, we've had a number of different episodes where we bring on B2B CEOs and ask them, the title of the podcast is, what do B2B CEOs want from their CMOs?
Yes.
And the question and the answer is actually very, very different depending on who you're talking to. And then you double that up with the fact that the misalignment between just the go-to-market strategy and core elements of that strategy, right down to like the ICP and different things, can vary dramatically within the C-suite.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that are just, I think that education factor, right, is a huge component of it, because, we know we have to be not just lead generators, we got to be more revenue driven, we got to be more pipeline driven, right? But we're also C-suite executives, right? So C-suite executives have a role in establishing the long-term viability of the business, right? In the direction where the business is going.
Right.
And we just don't sometimes get that chance to play that,
Yeah, and I think you have to always approach marketing from the standpoint of understanding that marketing strategy is an offshoot or subset of business strategy. It can't be vice versa.
Right.
And so if you're a marketing leader and you're trying to create a strategy sort of in a vacuum, you're putting yourself behind the eight ball a little. You've got to be aligned with where the CEO wants to take the firm. You've got to be able to articulate for the CFO, this is what I want to spend and why, and do certainly some internal education there, and be able to speak their language. You've got to certainly have alignment with the sales organization and with the head of sales to understand their reality. But at the same time, marketing by definition is, I've always found in my roles, and it's part of what I've liked about the roles, is that as a marketing leader, you've always got one foot in the here and now, this week, this month, this quarter, and one foot in where are we going as an organization 12, 18, 24 months from now. And sometimes that's where the disconnect can happen, because I always talk about the yin and yang of sales and marketing. And to me, that yin and yang is the essence of it is sales is almost totally focused on this week, this month, this quarter.
Yeah.
And marketing is largely focused on the longer term. And neither of those points of view are incorrect. They're absolutely right, but there's got to be an appreciation that one has for the other. And that's where I think the relationship building and the clear articulation of strategy, and as you said, go-to-market should be about both sales and marketing. Not have committee meetings about every little thing. That's not collaboration. That's that's just inefficiency. But there's got to be a clear alignment on where are we trying to go as an organization. As you touched on, things like, it may sound basic, but as like your ICP, your ideal client profile, very clear and in very lockstep alignment of who you're trying to get in front of and why. Also, what the strategy is when it comes to trying to win new logos versus existing clients and expanding those relationships, because certainly sales and marketing both have to have a certain degree of their focus on maintaining, retaining, expanding existing customer relationships. I think sometimes that can tend to get lost in the shuffle and get a little bit of lip service in favor of the new logos. Revenue is revenue, right? And oftentimes the least path of resistance to revenue is expanding your existing client relationships. And as an offshoot of that, getting referrals to other organizations or getting those satisfied, loyal, thrilled customers to come to you again when they inevitably go on to a different organization, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. We're, as B2B organizations, we should be getting 30, 40% of new annual revenue from existing clients. But when you, right. Yeah. But what percentage of our actual efforts, right? Our time, our thinking, our budgets are put towards that? It's not 30 to 40%. We'll guarantee you that. I've never met an organization that had that, but it's that balance, right? We got to at least swing the pendulum a bit and get a little bit more balance in there.
Absolutely. And And balance, I think, in a lot of ways around marketing is such a key term and thing to keep in mind. That balance of, we can talk about sort of that balance between brand and demand. Brand and demand are absolutely not at odds with each other. They are not a binary choice. It's not a like, well, this cart comes before this horse. They have to be in lockstep because they inevitably, if done well, feed off of each other.
There was a woman, a 3-time B2B CMO, and she was on a little over a year ago on the podcast. And she said something that's just really stuck with me. She said that today's brand is tomorrow's demand.
Absolutely.
Right. If we stop this brand, development and effort, that the demand gen side is going to significantly suffer.
Well, it's at least, I mean, if you look at some of the data, and I forget the source of it, but I heard about this fairly recently. Things like the percentage through the buying process that in B2B that the average customer is, it's close to 70% of the way through before they ever contact a vendor or they're willing to take a phone call. And when they do start getting into like that active buying mode, and most of your ICP, if you're listening to this, most of your ICP, like it or not, is not in active buying mode. But those sorts of things scream for brand investments and that continual loop of developing visibility, credibility, trust, and engagement, so that when somebody goes from not in buying mode to active buying mode, you're either the vendor that's at the top of the list, or you're at least on their short list of 3 or 4 vendors. Because if you're not, you're going to be behind and you're not going to catch up at that point. They're too far down the road.
No, and the general rule that only 5% of the market is actually in the market to buy right now, right? So you can't just market to that 5%, try to get all the intent signals and say, we're just going to market just to that 5%, and try to determine that. Because at that point, if you haven't already established yourself as a player, and there was a study that came out a year ago this month. It was called the Trust Gap, and it said that 74% of B2B buyers don't trust the customer evidence that we present to them, right? So the idea, brands are trust marks, right? Nobody really kind of talks about it that way anymore. But if you open up all the books and things that we saw in college and things like that, right? If we don't create that trust and that awareness and that trust with us, we're not going to get on that list. We're not going to get talked to, right? We're not going to have an opportunity. And so the idea here, though, is how do we create brand and demand at the same time, right? Are these two exclusive efforts, or is there actually a way that we can be accomplishing both of those at the same time?
I've always believed they are not mutually exclusive in any way.
Yeah.
As you said, brand seeds demand, and when as we're talking about sort of thematically in this discussion, part of the role that a marketing leader in the marketing organization has to play is getting the organization to understand this, what can be a really sort of loaded topic of when we talk about brand, what do we mean? Because it can be inferred as it's a nice to have, it's some squishy thing that doesn't have an impact on business performance. Nothing could be further from the truth. The brand has absolute direct equity in the organization. Brand, when done well, drives incremental revenue. It drives competitive differentiation. It's the farthest thing from the truth that brand is some touchy-feely thing that is removed from the business. Again, understandably, as we said toward the outset, with so few people at the senior levels having any sort of marketing experience, it's incumbent upon the marketing leaders in the organization to help bring those people to the table and understand it. Because also when we talk about brand experience from the customer standpoint, and you always want to bring marketing has to be probably the primary one that always brings the customer's perspective and what the customer values to the table. And that directly is related to what we talked about with brand. And you've got to also help people understand when it comes to brand, how does their role, and very specifically day to day, week to week, directly reflect the brand that the organization is trying to create. And you as a marketing leader, you can't answer that for them, but you can certainly facilitate that dialogue and go to department heads and help sort of have those group discussions at the functional and team level. But people have to understand the direct role that they play. If they're in sales, they're in customer service, they're in product development, any sort of support function. Those roles all play a huge role in the brand perception that an organization creates or strives to create. And that cuts across any industry.
That's something in there that I want to follow up on. And because you talked about how one of the roles that marketing has is to really be that voice of the customer inside of the organization, right? And we all know that the customer is the highest voice of authority in our business, right? We all know that, the customer, when the voice of the customer leads ours, it's more authentic. Our campaigns work better. Our sales enablement strategies work better, right? So is it your perspective on that then that we should be owning as the head of marketing, CMOs or organizations, that we should be owning that customer voice, that we should be investing heavily in understanding that customer voice?
So yes, I think marketing has to be the primary driver of staying connected to the customer and having their voice represented, as far as, because it will then directly relate to it and impact how you talk about yourself as a brand. Because as a leadership team or anybody in the organization, you can sit around the table and come up with ideas of this is who we are, this is the value that we bring, this is how we're different in the market. And you can come up with a partial answer and you're certainly informed. But if you don't have the customer voice at the table very, very directly through voice of the customer interviews, surveys, however you might gather that information on a very regular ongoing basis, NPS projects, net promoter score projects can certainly feed into this. But any sort of view of this is who we are and what makes us great and different without that is highly, highly incomplete.
So one thing I want to ask on that same, wavelength here is a lot of what organizations do is we learn about the customer through the lens of what we do for them, right?
Yeah.
But our customers have a much broader set of challenges that they're facing, and they want to know that we're a partner in helping them, right? If we don't understand those broader set of challenges and we just stick to kind of the things that we do as a core as a business with them, then we're going to be more of a vendor, right? And so, how do you said things like we need to stay in touch on an ongoing basis, right? Like, and I think that's great because our ICP is constantly changing and they're complex, right? That's the truth across businesses.
Yes, almost regardless of whatever industry you're in, your ICP is probably at least somewhat, if not significantly different than it was 5 years ago. And maybe it's not, and when I say that, maybe it's not that the primary players or your primary persona has changed, but I guarantee that other people are now involved in the process. When there's so much data that talks about the expansion of buying committees, the people that are involved at varying points in the process that either are people that can say yes, or conversely are people that maybe not they're ones that can say yes, but they certainly are ones that can say no. That's when you get into, financial ratifiers and procurement and people like that. Those people become an important part of your ICP, and you've got to understand how to speak each of their languages and create content and communications that is relevant for them, that is about the challenges that they're facing. If all of your marketing focus is on this is why we're so great, here's our customer logos, here's, you're just inundating people with product features and benefits. As you said, when your clients, your ICP are doing Google searches, they're searching for answers, very literal answers to questions that they have. Oftentimes, they're searching for answers to problems that they're not even quite sure in their own heads that they even have yet.
It's amazing the amount of research that goes into it. You threw that stat that B2B buyers do these days, right? You threw the stat out. There was I think a study from Sixth Sense that came out that said 82% of B2B buyers have mentally picked a winner when they get ready to talk to that short list, right? They haven't talked to it yet, but they've already picked who they think their winner is. So we talk about just getting on that short list, but then actually being the one that they think is the right one. And it's the one that they think solves their problems, right? And every B2B organization in that list, when they talk to them, is going to say they do everything that they want, right? Nobody's going to come in and say, we've got a massive pool. The 5 things that you really need from us, 3 of them, we've got those nailed. These 2, we're kind of working on that right now, right? So they get a sea of sameness in terms of the actual service, or the product, or the technology that the organizations are saying that they can do to help them with, right? So you look at it from their perspective, you turn 180 degrees around, right? Now all of a sudden that brand, trust, right? That position as a consultant and advisor, understanding their business, right? And the broader set of challenges they face really becomes important, really becomes important.
Yeah, you need to have a point of view that is out there, that is provocative, that is absolutely forward looking. It can't be just swimming in a sea of sameness. You can't be lulled into a sense of talking about yourselves in ways that all of your competitors do, because it just creates, again, if you bring in the voice of the customer in, or the perspective of the customer, they get frustrated when they look at 20 different companies, and those 20 different companies are all basically saying the same. And it can be maybe a little bit daunting, or cause a little bit of anxiety to step out and say something that's really unique, and create a brand that's really unique. But it's what your buyers crave. And if you really, really do a good job of focusing and being really honest about your ICP, and not just sort of giving it lip service around, company size and industry and people of this job title, but really looking at what are the issues that those personas are facing, what do they care about, where do they hang out, and sometimes that's where you've got to get voice of the customer too. What do they look at? So if you can gain visibility in those places, then they'll tell you. But all those things come into play. And again, I can't stress the idea of, and this is where, things like content marketing and thought leadership come into play, so that you can have insights that you can, maybe internally, people will say, well, what does this do for us? It might be blog content, articles, podcasts, webinars. Like, what does this do for us? When the answer or the question you should be asking is, what value does the customer find in this? What value does the prospect find in this? And if you can clearly answer that, frankly, that's what matters.
I love telling like stories like around like what you just said. There was another CEO, 2-time CEO, former CMO, came onto the podcast, and he said, talking specifically about what you're talking about right now, right, is how you're adding value. If you think about how do I add value to them, it takes care of our objectives, right? And he said, we were in our industry was pharmaceuticals. And he said, we were number 18 in the market. He says, the CMO, all I did, all of my events, all my marketing, all the newsletters, every bit of distribution, sales enablement materials, everything that we did was around how do we add value? How do we add value? That was the one thing that every single time they prioritized every project, every priority within the organization, because marketing gets lots of stuff thrown at us, right? And the way that they prioritized it was, how is this, what is the greatest value from all these projects? Where can we get provide the greatest value to our customers, right?
Yeah.
And that was the complete focus. And over a 5-year period, they rose to number 2 in the market in terms of sales. Amazing case study. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Steve, it's absolutely a long game. There is no, as much as people crave it, there is no magic bullet. So it's absolutely, as you said, it's a long game. And if you focus everything that you're doing from a marketing standpoint on, does this increase our visibility in the right ways and send the right message? And does it add value from the recipient standpoint, from the ICP standpoint, from your existing customer standpoint? If it checks all those boxes, you're doing the right thing. And as much as you want to measure every single thing and you want every single thing to fit nicely and neatly into, an if this then that spreadsheet, sometimes, it's like I talked to somebody recently, the real expert in this too. And one of the things she said to me that stuck with me is don't confuse what's measurable with what's meaningful.
Mm. Mm.
Again, from a marketing standpoint, we have a lot of tools and things at our disposal that we can measure and show the organization where we're making progress, moving the needle, supporting revenue, supporting customer retention, a litany of things. But there are cases and there are aspects of marketing because it is, as you know, it's an art and a science, right, Steve? It's an art and a science that screams for be meaningful and be impactful, even if you can't necessarily measure every single last tiny component of it.
Right.
And that meaningful aspect, again, is in the eye of your buyers, your potential buyers, your existing customers.
I want to go back to under this, what we were talking about earlier is this balance of like, and you said absolutely, like the idea of building brand is separate from building demand, right? So like one example of this is I was talking to another a 4-time B2B CMO, and she said, we've started this podcast and we're bringing our industry experts on it, and we take snippets out of that, short videos, and it fuels the SLAs between marketing and sales for them to share, because they just can't sell month after month after month the same, like it's a long cycle, right? So but they can add value, right? There's no limitation for how much value you can add, right? But you can't just sell, right? So that to me is like a perfect example of like so focused on brand, in our conversation here, but how that value that the brand creates that then lifts our reputation, our trust factor, it has very tactical daily applications, right? At the same time, you know.
I mean, when you're doing, and this is where, your content strategy comes into play, because a content strategy that is hypothetically, and a lot of organizations do this, is at least in part original research based, right? So you're creating content based on original research, which then you're going to package and slice and dice, if you're doing it right, in a lot of different ways. Because again, part of what marketing is tasked with doing is meet your buyers where they are, both within the buying process and keeping in mind what we talked about earlier about the 95-5 rule, right? That only 5% of your ICP is in active buying mode at any given time. And the reality, marketers, is you can't move the needle on that yourself. You're not going to change that. Right. What you can impact is your visibility, your ability to be on people's minds, to be a preferred or the primary vendor for when they do go from inactive to what's called poised, which maybe they're starting to sort of think they might have a need, they might have a problem, to actively getting into that 5%. But your content strategy also has to meet people where they are from the standpoint of, for example, I saw a stat a few months ago that said, I think it was 75 or 76% of B2B buyers are now 45 years of age or younger. And I think this year in 2025, it's being bumped up to like 78% or something like that. But it's a significantly high number. And you got to think, even just generationally, how do people that are in their 30s and 40s that are now in decision making and buying modes, how are they consuming content in ways that are different from people that might be 10, 15, 20 years older? You use examples of things like podcasts and short form video content. How do they do searches now in ways that are different? do, online Google searches and things like that. What's the impact of AI on those things, on things like Google search? We're already seeing that move quickly and in a lot of other ways. So having a content strategy that creates messages and creates content that is, again, value added, but again, is packaged in all the different ways that your buyers prefer to consume it, short form, long form, et cetera, and getting them out into the channels where those people hang out. And again, that goes back to the voice of the customer and getting the customer to tell you, like, what sources do you lean on? What do you read? What websites do you visit? How do you consume social media? Places like LinkedIn, all of those things come into play.
So I want to go on for like another half hour, an hour. Because I can't believe we've already hit like about 30 minutes on this. So I have one more really important question to ask you. And that is, we've talked about a lot. If there was one thing that you wanted everybody to remember as a result of watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, what's the one thing you'd have them take away?
I think it sort of emphasizes something that we've been talking about a lot, which is your brand strategy and your demand strategy are not at odds with each other. They are not mutually exclusive. They have to be working in conjunction with each other so that you're absolutely doing things from a marketing strategy standpoint to help engage people that are in buying mode, do active demand generation, work on expanding existing customer relationships in a very methodical way, while at the same time doing all of the things that are going to gain you that visibility, that preference, that differentiation 6, 12, 24 months from now.
Yeah.
Those things absolutely work in concert with each other. It is not a matter of choosing between the two of them.
Well, I know people are going to have questions. Is it appropriate that we would give maybe a link out to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out and get a hold of you?
Absolutely. That's the best place to reach me right now would be through LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active there. And always love hearing from people. So anybody that would want to reach out, that would be great.
Well, Will, thank you very much for coming on. And I love this kind of a lively conversation and debate, right? It's interesting because it's almost like we feel like the stepchild inside of organizations when nobody really truly gets us, like screaming, "Oh, look, we can," there's so many ways that we can activate this organization, So I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you having me, Steve. Like you said, marketing is often misunderstood, or sometimes I hate to say it, I've seen it a lot, like doesn't have a seat at the leadership table where it should.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the job of marketers and marketing leaders internally to demand that and to earn it.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of, like you said, proactive education, and proof points, and also as a last point, again, just making sure the organization is aware of the role that they play in all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of our own role in our own internal education, making sure people know why we're there, what we're doing, and then we gotta prove it. Yeah. Thank you, Will. Thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.